Good evening, welcome to New Horizons. If you have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please, thank you. Right, massive welcome back to Brian Halliwell with historical tales, myths and stories. Brian takes us back over 2,500 years and examines characters and events from that day, from that time, right up until today. Some strange, some a bit scary. Please welcome Brian Halliwell.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you very much. And can I just check that everybody can hear at the back? Yes. Right, thank you very much. And it is a pleasure to come back. And as I was mentioning it to one or two others before, 10 years has passed, over 10 years has passed since I first came here actually doing talks. I came here about 10 years ago, which was about 2004, maybe 2005, and I did a talk called The Women Pirates. And I think you were here, Rob, that night. I think you were, and Chrissy was here. Yes, John was here. There was only about 12 turned up. The reason being, it was a very foggy night. Nobody could get here. I was lucky to get here, but about 12 hardy souls got here, and that was the first talk I ever did here, The Women Pirates. And then later on I did a talk on the world of synchronicity, which we were just having a chat with one of the chats before, the world of synchronicity. Then we did the Magicians of the Golden Dawn, the life of Aleister Crowley, that we just had a discussion about, good turnouts for that, the Philadelphia experiment, the Mothman. So in other words, over the last 10 years, I've done about 6 talks here. But tonight, really, it's time for something completely different, really, something completely different, because this talk, the historical tales, myths and stories, really has its origins back in 1994. Because round about 1994, that's when I started studying the ancient world. I got so keen on the ancient world and ancient history, I finished up taking a degree in it. I got a BA degree, and very proud I was to get it. Hard work, but very proud. In other words, studying the classical world, the Greeks and the Romans. And I don't know whether you know this, but when the Greeks defeated the Persians in the 5th century BC, it just about started our Western civilization. Because if the Greeks hadn't won, our destiny would have been so different. Because the Greeks, they brought us art, democracy, philosophy. We learn a lot from the Greeks and the classical world and the Romans. And believe it or not, we got the joke from the Greeks and Romans. We learnt to laugh at jokes from the Greeks and Romans. That's where we got jokes from, the classical world. And people don't believe this, but we did. We got jokes from the ancient world. We inherited jokes from the classical world. This joke I'm going to mention now, and when people talk about cracking jokes and somebody says, well, that's an old joke, this really is. This joke is 2,500 years old. You are very privileged to listen to it. I'm not saying it's a good joke, it might be a rubbish joke, but it's 2,500 years old, this joke. And it's just like the old jokes that people used to tell about the Englishman, Scotsman and Irishman. It involves a barber, a ballman and a professor who go on a long journey which involves camping overnight. And when the ballman and the professor go to sleep, the barber, just for a bit of a laugh, decides to shave the head of the professor. He has his little machine, he cuts all his hair off, leaves him bald, then for a laugh he gives him a nudge. The professor wakes up, he feels his head, he yawns, he says, you idiot, you've woke up the bald man instead of me. That speaks volumes on what these people used to listen to 2,500 years ago. This second joke I'm going to mention now, comes from the oldest joke book in the world. 265 jokes in it. It was written in Greek. I wish I could get my hands on it. I've got a few jokes from it. And it was published around 284 AD, in the 3rd century. Oldest joke book in the world. And many jokes in it. This particular joke is a simple doctor and patient joke. Been doing doctor jokes ever since. When this patient says to his doctor, "Doctor, when I wake up in the morning and get up," he says, "I'm a bit dizzy for about half an hour, then I'm okay. What do you think I should do about it?" And the doctor ponders this for a minute and says, "Well, why don't you just stop in bed another half an hour?" Common sense. That's what they used to laugh at in the ancient world. And when we talk about mother-in-law jokes, Les Dawson doing mother-in-law jokes, and I've done talks on Les Dawson over the years. Mother-in-law jokes, you can trace them back to ancient Rome. I have got an old book that I was studying at the time when I was doing the degree from the Roman times, and there's a snippet in that book that mentions a 1st century Roman satirist by the name of Juvenal, who is said to have rocked his audience when he said, "Give up all hopes of peace while your mother-in-law is still alive." That's 2,000 years old. So in other words, we do learn a lot from the Greeks and the Romans. And those are 3 very old jokes, and they literally are old jokes, dragged up from the ancient world. And when we talk about the Greeks and Romans, we do learn a lot, and as I'm sure that we all know and remember, the Romans were here in Britain for about 400 years before we finally got shut of them around about 410 AD. Finally got shut of them. And when you think that a lot of generations of people actually knew nothing else but Roman power. They were born, they died, others were born and died, all they ever knew were Roman power. But eventually we finally got shut of them around about 410 AD. And as I'm sure we can all remember from the old school days, all this started with Julius Caesar. When Julius Caesar came here twice to Britain in 55 and 54 BC, but as I'm sure we can all remember from school, he did not conquer Britain. It's amazing how many people think he did. He came twice in 55 and 54 BC, but he did not conquer Britain. Did not conquer Britain. And just a little fact I wanted to get clear in your minds. But the thing is, Julius Caesar did come twice, he didn't conquer Britain, and I want to dispel another myth about Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was never a Roman emperor. Amazing how many people think he was. You listen to these documentaries on the television, and sometimes they'll say Julius Caesar, Emperor of Rome. You can read learned articles about Julius Caesar and the ancient Romans, and they'll say Julius Caesar, Emperor of Rome. I go to the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool many times because I love the old paintings. I don't bother driving, I just catch the train from Preston to Liverpool, I get off at Lime Street, I walk across the road, and the Walker Gallery is there. 5 minutes walk across the road, big 3-storey building, I go in and look at all the great paintings. I have a cracking day every time I go. When you go in the Walker Gallery, walk up the steps towards the reception, on the right is a room full of old sculptures from the ancient world. It's worth visiting. There's all these marble sculptures, and there's all these statues, and there's all these busts of the Roman emperors in that room on the right. All the Roman emperors, and on the wall, on the right side, there's a bust of Julius Caesar. And outside it says Julius Caesar, Emperor of Rome. I was staggered when I first saw it. I thought, there's thousands of people coming here, read that, and then think Julius Caesar was an Emperor of Rome. And I think next time I go back, I'm going to tell somebody, because otherwise they'll always keep believing that. So when next time I go, I'm going to tell one of the attendants, excuse me, that is wrong. So in other words, Julius Caesar was not an emperor. Julius Caesar had been a dictator for 10 years. Just to remind ourselves from the school days, Julius Caesar was a dictator for 10 years. And he didn't hide the fact that he hated the Republic. He reported to a Senate body, he had a lot of power because he was a powerful general, and he was getting too much power, and this is why he was murdered in 44 BC by the senators. They stabbed him, he was getting too much power, and they got rid of him. And he died in 44 BC. And when Julius Caesar died, lots of people then tried to get the top job. They moved in, all sorts of top generals, wanting to fill his shoes and get the top job. And to cut a very long story short, it basically came down to 2 men. 2 men. Julius Caesar's great nephew, the young 18-year-old Octavius, who was known as Octavian, and Mark Antony. Mark Antony. So these 2 controlled the Roman world. They decided to split the Roman world in 2. Octavian, the young 18-year-old great nephew of Julius Caesar, took the west, and Mark Antony took the east. And as I'm sure, as we all know from school, Mark Antony wanted to carry on his campaigns in the east, and to do this he needed the strength of the Egyptian forces. So he teamed up with Cleopatra, which was his greatest mistake. So in other words, they became an item, as I'm sure we know. Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they finished up having children, but if Cleopatra had come back to Rome with Mark Antony, she would have had a big seat in power in Rome. People didn't want a foreign woman in power. Octavian knew this, so he thought, right, I can get rid of these 2 and get all the power for myself. So the young Octavian waged war on Mark Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium, just off the coast of Greece in 31 BC, and the result of that was he defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. In one swoop, he defeated them. And the result of that was, as I'm sure we all can remember from school, Mark Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. So this left this young 18-year-old man ruler of the Roman world, and he eventually became Augustus, and he became the first Roman emperor. So in other words, when Julius Caesar was killed, emperors were 13 years away in the future. And I just thought I would mention that and clear up any misgivings about that. The number of people who said to me he was an emperor and he wasn't. 13 years in the future, emperors, when Julius Caesar was killed. Just thought I'd clear that up. So this young 18-year-old lad became master of the Roman world, and he became the first Roman emperor, Augustus, and he ruled for 40 odd years. But we can thank Julius Caesar for one thing. When you study the ancient world here in Britain, and I'm sure some of you might have studied it, you've got to study coin evidence and archaeology, because the ancient Britons did not write anything down. Unlike the Greeks, unlike the Romans, the Egyptians, where you've got plenty of sources, here in Britain we did not write anything down. So to study the ancient world, you have to study coin evidence and archaeology. I was studying all this because I was trying to discover who was the leaders here in Britain just before and after the Roman occupation, in order to do a talk at a university. I was trying to get the names of the people who ruled here all those years ago. Painstaking task. And it was while I was studying the ancient world here through coins and archaeology, I did make an amazing discovery. I found out the name of a king who ruled here between 95 and 65 BC, here in Britain. The name of a king, and I found it by accident. Does anybody know who that king might be? I just thought, sorry? No, it wasn't. And I just thought I'd mention it because when I was first doing what became a talk about the ancient kings and queens about 12 or 13 years ago, in Billings history, I had a big crowd in that night, and I mentioned about this early king who ruled here between 95 and 65 BC, and I asked that question to the group, massive crowd, to the question to the group, anybody know who the name of that king is who ruled here between 95 and 65 BC? And a little fella at the back put his hand up. And I thought, well, this is good. Somebody in Billings knows his history of Britain. I said, you know who that king is who ruled here between 95 and 65 BC? He says, yes, I do. I said, who was it? He said, old King Cole. Everywhere you go, you get a comedian. You get a comedian. And I said, it's a true story, so I said to him, I said, well, actually, old King Cole was a close contender for the job, but because he was looked on as a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he, they decided he wasn't taking the job seriously enough, so they give it somebody else instead. And that somebody else was a man called King Diviciacus. I'll say that name again. King Diviciacus. Took me years to find it, and you've got it already. Already you've learnt some important information. When anybody talks about ancient kings, you can say, King Diviciacus ruled here between 95 and 65 BC, somewhere around that time. King Diviciacus. And we know his name because Julius Caesar told us. In his war commentaries, which was a series of 7 books, he wrote and published around 46 BC. I was studying these books to try to find these important names. And by accident, I just found this name in book 4. It started me off. Book 4, only about 3 lines, which you can easily miss. And I spotted it. And it said, a Gallic ruler ruled here in Britain as well as in his homeland. People remember him as warlord, King Diviciacus. So there it was, that name, after I'd been searching for ages, and I found that name, and that started it off. And then for about 10 years, I pieced it all together in what became the kings and queens talk about these early rulers. But I found that name out, and that started it all off. King Diviciacus. And once you've heard that name about 3 times, you never forget it. You've got it now forever. It's up there, and I'm sure you won't forget it. King Diviciacus. And those books that Julius Caesar wrote, those 7 books, his war campaigns, was the Gallic Wars. All about his campaigns in Gaul round about 57 BC and his conquest of the Gauls. And then, as we said before, then he turned his attention to Britain, and he came to Britain in 55 and 54 BC, but he did not conquer Britain. Various reasons why he didn't, but he didn't conquer Britain, and we'll not go into that. He didn't conquer Britain, and when Julius Caesar left, it was 97 years before another Roman force came here. And that was 43 AD with Claudius. Claudius came here, and as a matter of interest, they came here in 43 AD, the Romans, with the biggest invasion force ever to set foot on these islands. The biggest invasion force. 4 legions of 5,000 men, that's 20,000 crack troops, 20,000 auxiliary soldiers, 40,000 in total. There was 10,000 baggage animals, 900 ships. A logistical nightmare for the Romans. Heaven knows what the tribes in southern Britain thought when they saw this massive invasion force coming here to Britain. And as we said before, the Romans were here for 400 years before we finally got shut of them around about 410 AD. So the point of this little section that we've talked about here is that Julius Caesar was not an emperor of Rome. In other words, so it's good to sort out fact from fiction. It's good to sort out and get to the truth of certain things, because we hear all these stories. Another example that's come down to us, Devil's Island. We're all familiar with that term, Devil's Island. The island that lies off the coast of South America, just off the northeast coast of Guyana. I have sailed past Devil's Island, that little island that lies off the northeast coast of South America. Devil's Island, that name, it just conjured up an image of a penal colony that housed some of the worst and most violent criminals known to mankind. That name, Devil's Island, just about conjured up images of evil-smelling swamps, sadistic guards and harsh punishments. And we have these images because of books and because of films. Ever since Lionel Barrymore, the Hollywood actor, escaped from Devil's Island and trudged through the swamps in that 1936 film, The Devil Doe, others have made films about Devil's Island Prison. Has anybody ever seen that film, Devil Doe, 1936? Very rarely on. I saw it with my mum and dad when I was a little lad. It's on very rarely. All I can say is if it's ever on, The Devil Doe with Lionel Barrymore, watch that film about the Devil's Island Prison. The famous prison, Devil's Island, fostered other films starring the likes of Boris Karloff, Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Steve McQueen in Papillon. Has anybody seen Papillon? Yeah. Everybody must have seen that film. Used to be on every Christmas. Steve McQueen, Papillon. That film showed us the horrors of the Devil's Island Prison, did it not? Yeah. That showed us the horrors, how horrible it was. But when we watch films like that or read any books, we should always ask the question, is it fact or is it fiction? Is that what it was really like? Because in truth, the image that's come down to us about Devil's Island is a false one. The opposite is true. Devil's Island, this notorious prison, was more of a paradise than a prison. This island that lies off the northeast coast of South America had been a prison since about 1856 to about 1942. It was open almost 100 years. And it got its name Devil's Island not because of the conditions in the prison, but because of the vicious currents surrounding the island. And the island was only very small, about 1 square mile in area, so logistics shows it only ever held a few prisoners at any one time. In fact, it only ever held about 12. And brutal guards, sadistic guards like it shows in the film, there weren't any brutal guards, because the best security on the island was the vicious currents surrounding the island, and the sea was shark infested. The conditions in the prison was more than reasonable. Each prisoner had his own cabin and his own possessions. He had a little vegetable plot so he could dig and plant and grow his own food. And when a prisoner sat down to his evening meal, he was allowed a glass of wine. They could go for walks round the island whenever they wanted. Sunday strolls were regular. The prisoners were given fishing tackle to while away the hours. They had regular meal and regular health checks. In other words, they had a reasonable life, if not a good life. And I know that some of you were thinking, he's having us on. When I did this talk in Liverpool, 10 years ago, whenever it was, everybody were roaring with laughter. They thought I was pulling their leg. They thought I were having them on. Everything I'm telling you is true. These prisoners had a reasonable life, if not a good life. The only thing they liked was freedom. So what prompted such lavish attention?